here. If you want to represent what you think it is, I can represent that my report accurately represents every time I bought stamps. If you want to claim that it adds up to something, that's your
So that's a
prerogative.
lot of stamps, right?
Yes,
What were you buying the stamps for?
to send mailers,
Which mailers?
mailers that went out towards the end of the campaign.
What, I get you, I understand. But there's two types of mailers. Would you agree there's two types of mailers? Bulk mailers that are generally in the heat of the campaign, where you're getting the lower rates. And then mailers that you put a physical stamp on
Right.
that are, and why do you, at the end of a campaign, start putting physical stamps on a mailer instead of using bulk?
Oh, sure, because this is the first all-mail election that we've ever had in Ohio history, and I pray to God it's the last, because it was miserable. What the issue was, if you send by bulk mail rate, it takes a long time to arrive. You go to the back of the line at the post office, and so the traditional way of, dropping a bulk mailer out there, and then it will take like 7 days to arrive. Well, during the COVID primary, that's too long because every single vote is by mail. So you have to make sure that your mail piece is hitting within a day, maybe two. The only way to do that is to pay full freight and actually buy stamps and physically put the stamps on. The entire last month of this campaign was me and my wife and kids every single day sitting around the table for hours,
And what kind of mailers were those you
Let
were?
me finish. Stamping each individual piece of mail, drive back to the post office, drop it off. That's the reason for all the postage.
And what kind of mailers were you putting those stamps on? Just any kind of mailers?
The mailers that were sent for the campaign.
So, Mr. Stewart, if I've represented you, I've dealt with a lot of political people, and they give a very simpler answer to that question. Is towards the end of the campaign, you're putting stamps on there because they're called chasers. And you're actually sticking the stamps onto things that are going to people that requested an absentee ballot. And so that's why every night you're processing a set of them, because you get from the Board of Elections the chaser list for that day of absentee ballot requests. And you try to hit them right when their ballot's going to arrive. And that's why towards the end, it becomes husband and wife and kids and family and my mom, when I've done it, sticking those on there. Is that not what I just described, a very accurate description of, regardless of the 2020 primary, what happens towards the end of a campaign with what's called chaser pieces?
No,
That's not an accurate description.
not in my experience.
So do you wish me to then bring in an expert to talk about that it is?
You're asking what I do in my campaigns. I'm explaining what we did and did not do. I mean, my chase operation, I don't know how it's remotely relevant, but my chase operation is handled by somebody else. And it's not me and forcing my kids to sit around the table for weeks on end.
So who handles your chase operation?
I'm not going to discuss other campaigns. That has no relevance to this hearing.
Well, I think it has a lot of relevance because I want to direct you to Exhibit K. And it's going to be Chris, page 164. What does the second line item for 138160 say?
Absentee chase.
So I made a mistake when I filed my case in terms of what I thought was getting mailed. I don't actually think it was that piece 06. I think you were mailing an absentee chase for which you needed to buy 4,000 something stamps. And I think traditionally the HRCC or the ORP don't pay for a candidate's absentee chase piece. So do you,
Question there?
do you recognize that you had a absentee chase piece printed?
No, I don't. I mean, I can testify to what I said. There were a number of pieces. We produced them to you. They went out at the end of the campaign. ORP paid for the production. ORP paid to print them. They were then sent to my house. I was then responsible for going and buying stamps every single day, putting the stamps on them and sending them out. That is enormously atypical compared to every other campaign that I have ever run. And I obviously have disputed the entirety of this invoice for 3 years. That's why we're here. So I don't know why somebody wrote it that way, but I disagree with that in the same way I disagree with the entirety of the invoice.
So was that an answer to, no, you didn't have a Chase piece printed, or you did?
I think it's fairly obvious.
No, you didn't. I wasn't clear, so maybe.
Mr. Hicks, like, I don't know what we're arguing about. I'm telling you that there were pieces that were sent at the end of the campaign. You are determined to call that a chase piece. I don't consider that to be a chase piece.
Well, so let's
It's an
go.
irrelevant difference.
So let's go look at, in his exhibits, it would be, the little number at the bottom is 32. So Chris, if you go to his exhibits, exhibit 9, it's going to be towards almost the end of his exhibit 9s. How many counties, you said at one point in time, how many counties are in your district?
My current district.
You're back in this, I don't know if it's materially changed, Mr. Stewart, but back in the 20, you made some thing that you were kind of braggadocious that your campaign involves a lot of counties, correct?
That wasn't braggadocious. That's stating a simple fact. It was the largest county in the state. It had the largest number of counties of any district in Ohio.
how
I
many
wish it did. I'm not bragging about that. I'm just stating a simple fact. It's a big district. It's bigger than a mini congressional district.
Okay, so how many counties back then?
6.
So if I go look back in the back of this, and I think it was 32, and if Chris has it up there, it's page, that looks right, so. No, hold on.
It's on 20, said 32.
On his, he has little numbers on there. See that 32 there? Yeah, you got the right one. Separate from the page numbers I threw on there, he has numbers in this section. So what does that say at the bottom of the piece?
You want me to read it?
Before it says vote for conservative, what does it say right above there?
Return your ballot today.
And what does it say at the top? Next to Brian Stewart.
Mail in your vote today.
Now let's go forward one page, Chris. Back one page. This is the other side of that piece.
Correct.
Okay, now it has some bizarre disclaimer on there. I'll agree with you that it's neither your campaign's disclaimer nor is it ORP, but it also doesn't there, or would you agree that it doesn't have any indicia at all?
What do you mean?
Doesn't have any postal mark. That's what indicia means.
That's because that was a piece that needed a stamp applied to it.
And isn't that a chaser?
Objection, relevance.
It's completely relevant because the invoice in question says that he had absentee chasers printed. And he's acting confused about what an absentee chaser is, and that him and his wife were stamping some other random mailers at his house.
Well, I think what his point was, first of all, it's not relevant, I don't think, but regardless, what one candidate may think is a chaser, another candidate may not. I think the overarching point was that for this particular primary, this was a very unusual campaign, no matter how you want to label it.
I think that the fact that he just said there can be a different understanding of what chaser means makes it particularly relevant that we get his understanding of what chaser means.
Well, he's already explained it.
And I think he said that he didn't have a chaser.
But I'm pointing to this piece right here.
And I think he said that that's not a chaser. That's not what he was.
So then go to the next page, Chris. How is it not a chaser when chasers typically look like this? Because they're going to somebody who already has a ballot. So the chaser, you went to a different page.
Zoomed in.
You're on the different page though. Oh, no, that's fine. You're on the right page. You're on the right page. I'm sorry, my bad. I'm sorry. When a chaser would be typified, if I made a representation to you, Mr. Stewart, that a chaser is typified by wording about returning your ballot because it's specifically a chaser going to somebody who you know has requested an absentee ballot.
The reason is because,
He's not, are you making an objection or what are you doing?
yeah, yes, objection, because as Mr. Stewart has already painfully explained, during this particular election in COVID, it was a mail-in. It was a mail voting because of COVID.
What does that have to do with whether something was a chaser going to people who requested absentee ballots?
As he's explained, has everything to do with
I understand. I'm going to overrule. Ask your question again so it's clear and give him the.
So would you-
opportunity to answer?
So would you? Hello? So would you agree? Something's going on.
Let's try that again.
Okay, so would you agree, Mr. Stewart, that an intended audience for that piece on pages 32 and 31 And that's your numbers, whatever it is, 122 and 121, whatever that is, that the attendance audience for that would be a person who already had received a absent, or you knew had an absentee ballot.
The entirety of the electorate was voting by mail. So by default, sure, but every single person voted the same way during this all-mail COVID.
So in the 2020 primary, your representation here is everybody voted by absentee. What if I told you that's absolutely false?
I would ask you, what did they do? They walked in the Board of Elections and voted.
Because a
absentee?
significant portion of early voting took place before voting was stopped.
I candidly, 4 years later, I can't remember when COVID started shutting things down in relation to the campaign versus when the absentee window opened. I have no recollection of that.
And I don't have good recollection either. But I might have recollection. I'd have to go investigate it. But then when it came to April, whenever the last date is, there was another opportunity to vote in person then, I believe, but I could be wrong. But would you agree, based on what I said, that the election was shut down? If you remember, the election was, would you agree that the election was canceled the night before in-person voting?
I recall that.
Which would mean that the early voting had already taken place in person.
Some had, sure.
So you don't, I get that you don't recognize the piece that says return your ballot today and mail in your vote today, that you want to quantify that as a chaser.
I've explained how every single piece of mail that we sent works, and I can't state it another way just because you would prefer me to use different words.
But you're saying this was not the piece or a piece that was because you made this representation that there might have been newer versions of these pieces that you don't have.
Mr. Hicks, the dispute.
I'm in the middle of a question, please. So that this piece was not the piece, or something that was a later derivative of it was not the piece to which you were saying the $4,000 worth of stamps were applied to.
Objection, asked and answered.
I don't think you
This
answered that.
piece, which has a blank spot where a stamp goes, I believe to be one of the many pieces that we had to apply the stamps we purchased and reported to in order for them to be sent.
Which other pieces in here fit that category? This is the only one I observed
Yeah,
that
I
didn't
mean,
have
if you want to type through them, I can. This packet's a jumble now, but I mean, if you want to walk through and see each one that says return.
Well, if I represented to you that this is the only piece that doesn't have a bulk rate indicia, either the ORP or from another company, would you have any reason to dispute that?
I think so. If we went through the actual exhibits and took a look, I mean, there were multiple pieces that we applied mail to, that we applied stamps to.
In all of your campaign finance reporting during this period, which you provided in your exhibits, other than what is called old trail printing, what other printing did your campaign ever pay for?
Directly? Like we went and paid a printer?
Yeah.
I don't believe there's any other reporting of that.
Okay. Let's move to the radio ad. So do you acknowledge at this point in time that the radio ad was produced?
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that it ran?
I understand that other people have testified that it ran.
So I'm going to direct you to. I'm going to direct you, because you won't just give a straight answer to that, to exhibit H, which is starts on page 60. He put it up on the screen if you. So these, you heard, I don't know whether I testified to these or not, but you heard Mr. Schweitzer describe these. When she said that this was confirmation that these radio ads ran, the materials at this section?
Mr. Hicks, I can acknowledge his testimony. But I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer who does trials for a living, and in a real courtroom, we wouldn't be able to just bring in a document without an authenticated affidavit or somebody coming in to actually testify that they had a hand in preparing this document and it's true and accurate. I understand what it says. I understand what you believe it says, and I acknowledge that that's what Mr. Schweitzer believes that it indicates. But I'm not good, I have no knowledge about who prepared this or what it is. And so again, I've indicated that other people have testified that this ran. I have indicated previously, I never heard the ad run. I never had a single individual in my 6 counties tell me that they heard it. And that was the basis for
But
our,
that's all hearsay at this point, right? That
that's
other
my
people
direct
did.
testimony.
Well, but whether somebody told you but okay, so so you're still in this mode of that you're not convinced it ran.
Objection, I don't think he said that. I don't think it's.
I-
Well, that's why I'm asking the
I can't
question.
say it any other way. I understand there are documents that other people have testified to and that other people have testified that it ran. I have no firsthand knowledge that it ran.
Did you check the FCC database from which I sourced these documents?
No,
Did you call any of the radio stations?
no.
So let me direct you to his exhibit 10. So you put in your exhibits, exhibit 10 about WSEO radio. And then right after that, Chris, if you go a page, some Wikipedia thing on WZBL, I guess it is. And then another page on exhibit 12 on the next page on WAIS AM live. And then another page on Wiz something, exhibit 13. So you provided these exhibits. You'd acknowledge these are exhibits you provided.
Sure.
Why?
Well, when we have direct testimony, I think you'll find out.
I'm asking now.
It's my testimony and has been forever that I have never heard this radio ad run and that I had no individual ever inform me before, during, or after the campaign that they had heard it. The purpose of giving some background on these radio stations is they're all radio stations from the kind of far-flung corners of my district that don't reach Pickaway County. And so in, spring of 2020, when we're essentially homebound, I'm not going to hear a radio ad in Zanesville or Nelsonville or Hocking County or Morgan County or anywhere. So the point is just to indicate, to actually, prove what we're saying is these are regional stations from stations that do not reach where I live or work.
What's an example of a non-regional station in your district?
Well, I mean, it's like 610 WTVN in Columbus, like reaches my house.
So my question is don't you live in a district where there wouldn't be a predominant radio station? And if you went to purchase media on the Columbus station, it would be exorbitantly expensive because most of the people that would hear it don't live in your district.
Is that a question?
Yes.
The question is, do I understand how 610 WTVN works?
No, my question is, do you understand? Would you agree? I'll rephrase the question to make it simpler for you. Would you agree that your district does not have a predominant radio station in the district?
That is physically located in the district?
Or primarily serves the members of the district?
I guess I would disagree with that.
Okay, so which station is it? That's the one that serves the members of the district.
Well, I mean, there's multiple Columbus radio stations that have a wide enough reach to reach Pickaway, Fairfield, and parts of Hocking County.
So I live in Claremont County. You're aware of that, right?
Yes.
So I could go buy radio ads on Cincinnati radio stations. Would you agree with that?
Getting off the beaten path a little bit. People from room.
Sure.
So, but it would be, the cost performance of that would be unbelievably messed up because 90% of the people that would hear that ad would not live in my district because Claremont County is on the edge of the greater Cincinnati market. Would you agree with that?
I'm going to take your word for it.
Okay. Would you agree that it's normal that in districts like yours, it can be too expensive to use the city media and therefore there's a tendency to use the local or smaller media?
No, I couldn't say that I've been privy to those kinds of conversations.
So these are, I'm assuming that these exhibits you provided are the radio stations that are I didn't actually cross-reference these to this other documentation, but these are the radio stations. So I'm assuming, did you personally go through and identify which radio stations were in this document? Because I've never created a document that listed out just which radio stations were involved. You did that?
Yes,
And then you went to Wikipedia or whatever and Facebook and downloaded or printed these things and made them into exhibits? Did you do that?
I did.
Along the way of doing that, you thought it was more important to make exhibits in a packet than actually call one of the radio stations to confirm whether they had ran or not?
Mr. Hicks, whether it ran or not is not really the issue in the campaign yet. I'm explaining that why we wouldn't be aware that it ran at the time that we filed the reports. At the time we filed the reports in 2020, we were not aware of the ad. We had not heard it run. We had no reason to believe that it had run. That's my purpose of saying, other people have represented that it did. Fine, great.
So then let me,
Now the question is like, if it did run, it was paid for by somebody else other than the campaign who never told the campaign that it had been done or how much or what's reported or who was the entity that ultimately was making the payment. We still have no indication of who did that. And so any amendment of the report would be guessing, taking a stab in the dark, potentially being equally as false. And so that's the reason, as Ms. Cardilone testified to, the reason why there's been no amendment, and we wouldn't know what to amend it with.
so then help me to understand how you were not aware of a radio ad where you did part of the voiceover.
Sure. I was contacted and told by Megan Fitzmartin that they wanted to get certain things in the can, so they were done in case they needed to be run. They didn't think that this ad would run. They didn't think they would need to use it, but let's get it in the can just in case. So I was asked to record the disclaimer, and so that it would be available to run if they decided that it needed to be run. I was never involved in any other discussion, ordering, approvals, anything relating to the radio ad. I was never informed that a radio ad was being run. I never heard the radio ad on the radio, and I never had any constituent or anybody else say, "Oh, I heard the radio ad." So that was why I had no knowledge that it had run in 2020.
Who was the they that wanted to put it in the can?
Megan Fitzmartin.
No, let's make that a little broader. Was the they, the HRCC, or was the they, the committee to elect, or Friends of Brian Stewart?
Oh, they would have been to my belief, HRCC. In 2020, though, I mean, the whole thing was a mess. I mean, it was never quite clear who was running the show for the Republican campaign committee, because you had Constant Content, which was a private company with Jeff Longstreth and Megan Fitzmartin. You had HRCC, which is a statutory campaign committee. And there was just some sort of kind of amorphous blob out there where everybody kind of overlapped and everybody wore the same hat. So in a normal situation, the caucus, HRCC, would have been the entity that was making the decisions as to, do we run this, do we not? Who our
Okay.
vendors are going to be. And so, when we spoke to Megan, it's like, well, I'm talking to Constant Content, I'm talking to HRCC, I'm talking to Jeff Longstreth, it was never, the roles were never appropriately defined.
So you were like a county commissioner before your current role, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I guess I'm a little confused. If it was all HRCC, why did you record a disclaimer that said paid for by Friends of Brian Stewart?
My understanding, and this is typical, is I don't know that the campaign fund can do the direct TV and radio. That's as part of it. Yeah, I think it has to be identified as the committee.
But paid for by somebody else?
No, I mean, if you're asking why I recorded the disclaimer, because I was told that that's the disclaimer we needed
But
to.
for clarification, I'm specifically asking why, if you thought it was for the HRCC, you recorded a disclaimer saying paid for by Friends of Brian Stewart.
Their question.
It was a question.
Didn't sound like you finished.
Why, if you thought it was that it was for the HRCC, would you have recorded a
My-
disclaimer that said paid for by Friends of Brian
No, my
Stewart?
testimony was who asked you to record it? HRCC asked me to record it, and they asked me to record it with the paid for by Friends of Brian Stewart.
It was testified to before that there was no contractual written contract between you and Constant Content, correct?
Correct.
But you were aware that Megan Fitzmartin was an employee of Constant Content, correct?
I don't know that I knew that at the time.
So who did you think she was an employee of?
HRCC.
Okay. All right, we can go back to that someday. So did you believe that Megan Fitzmartin had any role relating to your campaign?
I understood her to be working with all of the Republican candidates who were endorsed by the campaign committee.
So the answer yes or no?
My answer is what I just said.
Did Megan Fitzmartin have a specific relationship to your campaign, Friends of Brian Stewart? I don't know what
No.
the answer is.
No,
The answer is no? Okay.
she's not an employee.
So why-
Well, let me finish then. If you're gonna ask, she's
Okay.
not an employee. She didn't get a 1099. She was with the caucus. I mean, that's not she didn't answer to me. She wasn't my employee. I didn't direct her activities. She was affiliated with the caucus, and the caucus was working on, getting mail produced, getting endorsements and those sorts of things.
So was the testimony just a little bit earlier of Mr. Schweitzer that Megan Fitzmartin was authorizing things on behalf of the campaign Friends of Brian Stewart? Or is it your testimony that she was doing, like she went rogue and was doing that?
Objection.
No,
So I'm sorry, again, I just want to be clear. Okay.
if
The
you can make,
testimony of Scott Schweitzer, Andy, was that Megan Fitzmartin was authorizing things specifically for Friends of Brian Stewart. That was his testimony. Are you here testifying that she was doing so in a mode where she was going rogue and authorizing things without your consent?
Objection.
with regard to the radio ad, we had no discussion about authorizing a radio ad.
So when you recorded a voiceover for a radio ad, did you not think that that involved any cost of like just to produce the ad?
Candidly, not really. I mean, you, if there are things that a vendor is like working on in draft, I mean, if you don't end up using it, I don't think I've ever received a bill for like, hey, we drafted an extra mailer that you chose not to send. Here's the bill for it anyway. That's just not custom and practice.
Would you acknowledge today that when a person is compensated for developing a mailer, whether or not it's on behalf of a campaign or authorized by a campaign, when they're compensated, okay, that it's a reportable campaign finance report, whether you mail it out or not?
I don't know that I can speak to that.
So if you went out and paid, just to understand, I want to make a more practical example, maybe it'll help clarify. If you went out and paid, let's say you paid my wife, who's an artist, professional artist, you paid her $50,000 to make a bunch of mailers for you. All that said Friends of Brian Stewart, and then you didn't mail any of them, but you paid her the $50,000. Would you believe that there's nothing to report?
No, I mean, if you're invoiced and you pay for something, then clearly you have to report it.
So if somebody else, let's take that example. Let's say that somebody else paid my wife that money. What did your campaign have? Your campaign, just a hypothetical, your campaign has a bunch of mailers produced, whether they're mailed or not. Somebody is paid to do that, but a third party pays for it, not the campaign directly. Do you understand as a knowledgeable guy, what kind of reporting is required in your campaign finance report for that type of event?
Don't know that I'm following you. I mean, if someone reports to the campaign that they have made an in-kind contribution on behalf of the campaign, then clearly we have to report that. And clearly, every single time we were given an indication that an in-kind contribution had been made, we reported it.
So you believe that if you're aware of an in-kind contribution, but you have not technically been notified, that you have no obligation under the law?
It's not what I said.
Well, clarify what you said, because you said when you receive notice, so I wanted to clarify whether you're saying that only when you receive specific notice of an in-kind, or do you have any obligation to report anything?
If you receive a text message that says, hey, I wanted to let you know I sent $10,000 worth of mail on your behalf, then yeah, I think you should report that. If you receive a email that says, we just wanted you to know we sent a radio, we've run a radio ad, then we would have reported it at the time, but we did not. And we had no knowledge of it. So that's why it's not.
So let's go to page 164 in my exhibits again. Almost done. I mean, this could be a lot easier with just a little more, I think it could be a lot easier.
Ask better questions.
So you said once you become aware, if somebody sent you a text message saying that they did this on your behalf, wasn't what's on page 164 that?
Well, if you receive notice and believe that it's accurate, then sure. If you are disputing the debt or you have reason to believe that somebody is trying to rip you off, as we did believe, then no, I don't think you would be reporting what you believe to be a fictitious, fraudulent demand for payment.
But you acknowledge that you participated in the creation of the radio ad, correct?
Correct.
You're still a little confused on whether it ran, despite testimony from Scott Schweitzer and FCC database invoices, correct?
Objection.
That's not what I said. I've testified to this 6 times already.
So are you willing to say now that yes, it did run? You've never said exogenously that I admit it did run. Would you say that
I
now?
understand that there are documents here that indicate
We gotta
that it ran.
go. We gotta get ready.
We're out of here. Let's go.
Abby.
An important part of this is when this invoice was first received, I didn't have any of this I didn't have an affidavit from Scott Schweitzer. I did not have any records from a radio station. I didn't have any indication from anybody that this ad had run. After the campaign, I specifically reached out to Jeff Longstreth, Megan Fitzmartin, Anna Lippincott, Stephen Caraway, and said, I have $70,000 left in my account. Is there anything else that we owe? Are there any other invoices that we need to pay? I was told no. I then made a second round of calls to all the same people and said, since I knew that this was such a goofy, bizarre primary scenario where I don't know if the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. I'm heading into the general election. I want to know how much money we have. Are there any other invoices for anything else that we owe? I was told a second time, no, no, no. If you haven't received a bill by now, you don't owe anything. That is why when I receive a year and a half later, a claim that directly contradicts what Jeff Longstreth told me immediately after the primary, then yes, I believe that's bogus. I think he got paid by HRCC. I think he got paid by somebody. And because he's hard up for money, indicted, and doesn't like me very much, well, let's see if I can go chisel another $12,000 out of Brian Stewart. That's why we disputed the payment.
So page 164 in here. So you said after the primary. When was the primary done in 2020? Do you remember that?
I think April
Okay. So when is the date on the invoice on page 164?
2020,
What's the exact date?
March 18th, 2020.
What's unique about that date?
No idea.
It's the day after the primary.
Great.
So if, let's say, I sent you an invoice dated 3/18, and then you kept calling me up saying, is there anything else? And I said, no, there's nothing else. You have what you have. Might it be that that date, 3/18, is prior to the end of the primary that ended in April? It's a day after that one might assume that you have that invoice and you understand that you're obligated to pay it.
Objection.
No, my testimony, again, is I have never received this, whatever date he wants to put on it. I never received an invoice from Constant Content until August of 2021.
So if I go look at Scott Schweitzer's affidavit, which is on
While you're looking at that, I'm not telling you to stop. It is 4:51. And so we were.
I can think I'd be done with my question before 5.
I'm just merely saying, it is 4:51.
I just need to find Schweitzer's affidavit. So there's F, it's F in my. So it's gonna be Chris, who's page 54 in mine. So you've had this affidavit was from April 26th of 2023. Yet my complaints that were from March and April of 2022. You have all this, the FCC database invoices. At this point, would you acknowledge that there was work done on behalf of your campaign and that took place?
Objection.
I acknowledge what Mr. Schweitzer's affidavit says.
So you said, you just testified a little bit ago that if somebody texted you saying, I did $10,000 worth of mailers on behalf of your campaign, that you would then have an obligation. Isn't this way more than a text message?
Objection.
I've answered this 6 times. I've explained why we filed the reports the way we did in March of 2020. I've explained when I received the invoice. I've explained that we disputed it. I am not going to amend a report to indicate that I owe Jeff Longstreth $12,000 if I dispute that I owe him $12,000.
Okay, so I just want to close this out here. I think, and you might remember too, Mr. Stewart, that back in the original genesis of my first complaint, which I think is 2020 something G004, is the first complaint. It was what number it had. You probably remember the preliminary hearing on that. And I believe the director's recommendation at that time was either to no violation or dismiss it or something to that effect. And then there was kind of a drawn out, preliminary hearing, and the commission voted contrary to the recommendations of the director. From that time, your affidavit was, so that hearing would have been somewhere around the time of your affidavit. Was B, it's item B. I just want to see what date your affidavit was. Your affidavit back to the commission denying all this stuff was the 27th day of April 2022. So since then, with all this evidence, all these reports, all these people testifying, versions of affidavits, because that was actually like the third version of Scott Schweitzer's affidavit, because it went back and forth. The stipulation that we worked on together with Goldstein that then was not ultimately accepted. At any point along the way, have you taken any action to, other than putting together this neat exhibit pack showing exhibits of Wikipedia and stuff on radio stations, to actually call a radio station, confirm with Scott Schweitzer whether these things happened or not?
Objection.
Oh, it's not an objection to me asking if you took any action.
Well, it's been asked and answered. It is,
Go ahead.
Whether the ad ran or not does not change the fact of if the campaign is not told who allegedly made the expenditure that we benefited from, then we can't accurately file any amendment. We were not involved in any of these expenditures, so there's also a question of whether it was just an independent expenditure we had nothing to do with. But beyond that, the complaint says we filed a false report in 2020. That is what we are denying and litigating. You've now morphed this into, well, I think you should have amended your complaint. Of course, you can't identify what you think we should actually file because your whole goal in this thing is for us to file an amendment that you think is also wrong, so that you can file another complaint and complain about that. We're not going to play that game with you.
So I would want to correct the witness that my complaint was merely that you failed to file a complete and accurate finance report. That's all my complaint was, and had evidence to support that. Not that you filed a fraudulent report, you knowingly did, that's why we're having a hearing on those things. And so, do you believe that there's a statute of limitations on having to file an amended report when you become aware of something that happened that was not properly reported?
I'm not aware of what it is.
Do you believe there is a statute of limitations?
I just answered your question.
Okay. Did you instruct, you had a conversation with Natalie Bauer and Don Bray?
Yes.
In what capacity was Don Bray part of that conversation?
At the time, Don Bry was the attorney for the Republican caucus. By this point, we were into the 2022 election cycle, and it was made clear to us that, members of the caucus could get legal advice from the caucus's attorney.
So was there some process by which you authorized that through the caucus? And what do you know
No.
whether Mr. Bry was paid?
I I would be highly surprised if Don Bry did legal work for which he was not paid, and I commend him for that.
Did you pay him?
Did I personally pay Don Bry? No.
Okay. Did you consult with anybody else other than, it sounds like from the testimony of your treasurer, there was you consulted with Natalie Bauer and Don Bray, and you. Was anybody else part of that consultation?
I think at some point Stephen Caraway was roped into the conversation. I've talked about this case to a great many people. I'm certainly not going to name them now because we'll get 6 more subpoenas, but we have thoroughly discussed this issue with attorneys, experts who do campaign finance reports, caucus personnel, other candidates, and everybody's feedback has been, it's a really strange situation from a really strange campaign. Frankly, that's why a lot of people are in prison now. But the reality is we are kind of stuck in a situation where there is no entity, HRC or otherwise, has indicated to the campaign what any in-kind contribution. So we can't just pull a number out of the sky
Okay.
and guess without.
This is my last
Yeah.
question. So, because I think everybody wants to get out of here. If Don Bray was representing the HRC or whatever it's called now, right? Whatever the caucus. And you're maintaining that these were confused expenses that the caucus was responsible for, why didn't the caucus simply produce a letter or affidavit for you that was the case?
They're not required to.
Well, if you wanted to clear up this matter, wouldn't an affidavit from the HRCC saying we were the ones responsible for this clear up this matter pretty quickly?
HRCC no longer exists.
Whatever the entity, the caucus.
Well, it matters here because HRCC was dissolved. A new entity was formed specifically to distinguish itself from HRCC. So there's nobody, as a practical matter, who has any authority to file reports for HRCC or to provide me an affidavit
So
as to
then-
what they did or did not do.
So in the context then of his consultation with you, Don Bray was not representing any entity that existed at this period. Therefore, he was not an attorney for
No,
some
that's
entity that
not
doesn't exist.
correct.
I'm not going to rest answering
By the
questions, but we're out of time.
By
I
the-
don't think I have hardly any other questions for him, but
By the
I'm not
time,
gonna, I'm
Let me
gonna
answer
just
the
leave
question. I
where
mean,
we are, unless you guys want to keep
Okay.
going.
No,
I can go
it's-
till 9. I have
It's
no problem.
4:59.
well, I'd like to finish the exact question he asked.
Okay,
at
please
least,
do
okay?
that, yes.
Yeah, by the time I was speaking to Don Bry, Ohio House Republican Alliance had been formed, which was the new entity which was serving as the legislative campaign fund. So yes, absolutely. Don Bry was retained by the Republican caucus to provide advice to members of the caucus.
So I think it's a little bit, would you agree that sounds a little bit shield and spear? So on one hand, you're saying that the reason why I can't get a letter saying that this was actually supposed to be.
You had asked your last question previously. He answered.
Thank you.
That. We can continue this at a later date.
I'm not even, okay, there we go. All right, thank you for your immense and extreme patience. We are going to continue this matter. Are we naming a date, Phil? Is it for December 19th, or you got to work with
To
council?
see what works.
Can I ask a
Madam
question?
Chair.
Are you gonna wait till the mandamus is resolved on witnesses or change your position? on it?
I'll work with council and we'll see where it goes.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
we're going into day 4. Okay. I mean, the edict on your website is we resolve cases quickly. All I'm asking is, if we're gonna have to come back here for another date, I don't want to bring all my other respondents. Have
He's
them miss
excused.
Another day of work.
Everybody can be excused except Carlotta can be excused, Embry can be excused.
please let him finish his statement first.
Fine, I'm finished.
And just for the record, this was the second hearing. He just said for 4 days.
We've had.
Second hearing.
It's a 4th hearing.
Thank you. Can you formally address who's excused of the witnesses rather than just pointing and saying
Mr.
he,
Embry is
she?
excused, as far as I'm concerned, if you guys agree that you're not gonna call him either, because you could want to call your treasurer in your case. So to me, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Embry's excused, Mr. Carloni's excused. Megan Fitzmartin's not excused. You did not appear today. Mr. Schweitzer's excused. Mr. Goldstein is excused unless they have some reason to try to recall him or call him in that case. So I believe the open witnesses are, that I have the right, the legal right to Aldombre and Natalie Bauer to impeach the testimony of Ms. Carloni. And I still might have a question or two for him in that mix, but I can clarify anything else if I'm leaving something out.
This commission, like any other court, has the discretion to say enough is enough. I don't know where Megan Fitzmartin's gonna be after January. It's probably not gonna be here. Now, and the way this has gone to this point is, every time he names an additional witness, like Bobby Mitchell for the first time today, well, gee golly shucks, we couldn't possibly have a hearing in January because Bobby Mitchell's gonna be on vacation for 3. Right? We have 7 commission members, 2 attorneys, multiple witnesses. And then whenever he finds another witness that he now wants to bring in, the whole thing has to end and get strung along for another month and another month and another month. At some point, when are we going to bring this thing to a close? I could come in for an hour, finish this thing up. I mean, come January, I'm gonna be pretty busy in this building.
Yeah,
It's not gonna be worth coming here for another 2 days over this.
yeah, we appreciate the root and the grit of your frustration, believe me. But I do believe there were conversations, information heard today that led to the relevance of the additional parties that were stated. And so that's where we are. Oh, geez, maybe. Mic that works. We will, for all parties' desire, we will aim to close this matter at the next hearing. That is the desire and will. I think, like, I don't even think I have to look at the other commissioners to know that that is the desire and will of this body. However, we can't change the results of today.
Madam Chair, it's not his desire. You just heard it. He's going to find more witnesses until you tell him he's done.
What more witnesses?
He's now have a mandamus action, so we're gonna wait until that's done.
Yeah,
and then
because
come
I've
back.
only asked for witnesses that are
Fully
directly come
empowered
out
to
of
see.
the Don Bray.
He's
And
had
don't
their
have
shot.
your people testify that they got their advice on what to do from Don Bray and Natalie Bauer.
And that's why
because
you
I'm gonna
make-
say that advice is relevant.
And that's why you make determinations about whether that's actually relevant and probative to the case. I've testified with what they said. He's a lawyer giving me
That's
legal
hearsay.
advice, so he doesn't get to come in. Natalie Bauer's not my treasurer. You're fully empowered to say, hey, folks, you've gotten enough circles.
And I'm
here.
fully empowered to file
wants to
a
come
mandamus
back
action to be able to.
and do
have
this.
access
Nothing
to
better
those
to do.
witnesses, and it, and a lot of this could be a lot shorter if certain people would just admit that, for example, that the radio ads ran. So we don't have hours of testimony of somebody going around in circles. I don't know that they ran. I still don't know that they ran. It's a complete waste
I
of.
think we need to adjourn at the moment. Mr. Knight has indicated 5. It's already past 5 o'clock. I appreciate everybody's arguments, but think we need to be done for the day.
All right, very good. Thank you for your time today for the hearing. The hearing is continued. As was already stated, please work with the executive director, council, on that date accordingly. Is there any other business in front of the commission today?
Madam Chair, I'd move to adjourn the hearing.
Second.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor, signify by saying aye. All opposed? We have collect.
Thanksgiving.
All right, pass unanimously.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
All right.
You,